The war has now reached every corner of Russia, a reality once unimaginable in Moscow's halls of power. What began as a special military operation has evolved into a nationwide emergency. Within a single night, over 130 Ukrainian drones struck targets stretching from Crimea to Siberia, an operation that shattered any illusion of safety for the Russian elite. Air raid sirens wailed over Moscow, and for the first time since the Cold War, the Russian capital felt the full weight of a modern, asymmetric war. The strikes were not random. Ukrainian intelligence meticulously mapped oil refineries, ammunition depots, and chemical plants that sustain Russia's war machine. By dawn, multiple fires illuminated the skyline over industrial hubs like Ryazan and Volgograd. Analysts noted that the operation was a clear demonstration of Ukraine's long-range strike doctrine, one aimed not just at destroying infrastructure, but at eroding Russia's sense of invulnerability. President Volodymyr Zelensky had warned just hours earlier that Ukraine would secure long-range capability as a cornerstone of its independence. That warning was not rhetorical. It was strategic theater backed by precise execution. For the Kremlin, the psychological impact was immense. Putin, according to Western intelligence assessments, retreated temporarily to a secure command site outside Moscow, an act that the Kremlin officially denied, but that reinforced the image of a leader under siege. The symbolism was clear: Russia's fortress was bleeding both physically and politically. From a social perspective, the fallout revealed deep inequalities in how Russia experiences war. While the elite neighborhoods of Moscow rely on advanced anti-air systems, poorer regional cities such as Bryansk and Kursk were left exposed. Reports surfaced of civilians using rifles and hunting guns to shoot at drones because official defenses were either absent or malfunctioning. The government's silence on casualties in these areas fueled resentment among families already burdened by disproportionate mobilization. In regions like Dagestan and Buryatia, ethnic republics, with some of the highest per capita death rates, the contrast with Moscow's calm indifference grew sharper. These regions, often exploited for manpower, but excluded from decision-making, now shoulder both the economic and emotional cost of the Kremlin's ambitions. Experts from multiple defense institutes in London and Warsaw describe the strikes as strategic messaging designed to expose the hollowness of Russian defense parity. Instead of a clash between two equal powers, Ukraine was turning the conflict into a war of precision versus waste-cheap drones, humiliating billion-dollar air defense systems. As one retired NATO general observed, the real target is not just infrastructure, it's Putin's credibility. The operation also had economic reverberations. Energy markets reacted within hours, with Brent crude prices rising above $100 a barrel, amid fears of further supply disruption. Inside Russia, refinery shutdowns created temporary fuel shortages, forcing Moscow to ban gasoline exports for domestic stabilization. The result was a sudden inflation spike that hit working-class Russians hardest. Food prices soared, transport costs doubled in some regions, and the once prosperous middle class found itself squeezed between sanctions and state propaganda. Yet beyond the immediate chaos, the political implications were even more profound. Telegram channels, some run by pro-war bloggers, openly criticized the Ministry of Defense for its incompetent response and false victory claims. Even though state TV continued to show intercept footage, independent analysts verified that several drones had hit their targets. This small but growing digital dissent, especially in channels with millions of subscribers, represents the first cracks in Russia's tightly controlled narrative. For Ukraine, this night marked a shift in momentum. Its forces demonstrated that geography was no longer a shield for Moscow, and that the Kremlin could be reached not by armies, but by algorithms networks of autonomous drones, guided by real-time intelligence. Western defense observers noted that this hybrid approach may reshape modern warfare, proving that asymmetric innovation can neutralize superior numbers and budgets. As dawn broke over the smoking fields of Western Russia, Putin faced a question he could no longer avoid if he cannot defend his own homeland. How long can he justify a war abroad? As the smoke rose over Russia's industrial heartland, the scale of damage became impossible to conceal. The strikes had not just targeted military installations, they went straight for the veins of Russia's economy. Oil refineries in Ryazan, Ufa, and the Republic of Mari El burned for hours, sending black columns of smoke high above the horizon. The Lukoil petrochemical complex in Stavropol, a vital supplier for Russia's defense industry, was among the hardest hit. Footage filmed by stunned residents showed secondary explosions lighting up the night, a clear indication that the site stored critical military-grade chemicals. For Ukraine, the symbolism was powerful. The message was not only that it could hit anywhere, but that Russia's own war machine was being dismantled from within. The decision to strike refineries, analysts say, was deliberate. These facilities produce essential polymers and fuels for Russia's tanks, drones, and missile systems. With every explosion, Ukraine was not just weakening the front line, it was dismantling the production chain that sustains it. Meanwhile, global sanctions imposed since 2022 had already crippled Russia's access to Western technology. Now the combination of sanctions and targeted drone warfare was creating a perfect storm. Economic observers noted that Lukoil, already struggling under U.S. restrictions signed by President Trump earlier this year, faced near-total operational collapse. The company was reportedly forced to sell off foreign subsidiaries at a loss while struggling to repair domestic plants, now reduced to rubble. Russian media downplayed the destruction, but satellite images told another story, dozens of heat signatures marking sites of ongoing fires across southern Russia. From a social perspective, the economic damage deepened Russia's internal divide. In Moscow, the elite continued their daily lives dining in upscale restaurants as if war were a distant echo. In contrast, factory towns across the Urals and Volga regions were plunged into uncertainty. Workers in oil and chemical sectors, once the pillars of Russia's industrial strength, were now facing layoffs and unpaid wages. Local telegram groups flooded with messages from desperate families asking when salaries would resume. "They tell us to be patient," one worker in Nizhny Novgorod wrote, "but patience doesn't pay for food." The Kremlin's appalling silence, as many online called it, only fueled anger in regions that had long felt exploited. From a political standpoint, these economic tremors carried dangerous implications for Putin's image. Since the start of the war, his legitimacy has rested on the promise of stability. But as factories shut down and paychecks vanish, that image of control is cracking. Western analysts have observed a quiet but growing disillusionment, even among traditionally loyal workers. In places like Dagestan and Bashkortostan, communities that once sent thousands of men to the front now feel abandoned. Their sons lost, their economies collapsing. What began as patriotic sacrifice is mutating into resentment. Russia's decision to defend industrial sites with soldiers rather than proper air defense systems underscored its growing desperation. Reports circulated of conscripts standing guard with machine guns instead of advanced radar equipment. The symbolism was grim, a nuclear superpower relying on foot soldiers to protect billion-dollar refineries. Military economists noted that each drone shot down by small arms might save money in the short term, but every one that slipped through caused tens of millions in damage, an unsustainable ratio for a country already straining under war debt. International markets were quick to react. European energy prices spiked as traders anticipated further instability in Russia's supply chain. Meanwhile, Chinese buyers who had quietly become Russia's largest energy customers began delaying new contracts, demanding lower prices to offset risk. the isolation deepened. In the wider strategic sense, these strikes revealed Ukraine's evolution into a self-reliant military innovator. No longer dependent solely on Western-supplied missiles, Kyiv's domestic drone program had become one of the most advanced in the world. Ukrainian engineers had transformed cheap civilian technology into weapons of precision, turning what Russia once mocked as toy drones into instruments of systemic disruption. By the end of the week, at least 7 major energy facilities had been hit, including one over 1,000 kilometers from the nearest Ukrainian-controlled territory. Western experts called it the farthest successful strike inside Russia to date. The attacks forced Moscow to confront a harsh reality: its vast geography no longer guarantees safety. As power outages spread through industrial regions and the ruble continued to slide, the question was no longer whether Ukraine could reach Russia's economic core, but how long Russia could afford to keep the war alive at all. In Crimea, the war's next chapter unfolded with surgical precision. On a moonless night, Ukrainian drones and long-range missiles struck deep into the peninsula, hitting air defense installations that had once been advertised as impregnable. Within hours, satellite images confirmed that at least one Pantsir S-2 system, worth roughly $20 million, was reduced to charred metal. 2 radar stations were also destroyed, opening a gap in Russia's early warning network that had shielded much of Crimea from aerial intrusion. The strikes were not just tactical, they were psychological. Crimea has been a centerpiece of Russian national pride since its annexation in 2014, a symbol of Moscow's supposed resurgence. To see it under constant bombardment in 2025 dealt a severe blow to Putin's aura of control. In Sevastopol, residents who once gathered to celebrate naval parades now filmed plumes of smoke over the same ports. Ukrainian intelligence deliberately targeted dual-use infrastructure fuel depots, power plants, and logistics centers, forcing Russian troops to compete with civilians for dwindling electricity and water. Analysts observed that the offensive was part of a broader campaign to paralyze Russia's southern logistics. The hit on the Simferopol thermal plant cut power to large sections of the peninsula. At the same time, fires erupted at the Akan oil depot, already struck twice before sending flames visible from orbit. The repetition itself carried a message: Ukraine could strike the same facility again and again faster than Russia could repair it. From a social perspective, the Crimean strikes exposed who truly bears the brunt of the conflict. While Moscow's elites continued to enjoy uninterrupted power and imported luxuries, Crimean civilians, many of them relocated Russian workers or ethnic Tatars who never supported annexation, now face fuel shortages, water rationing, and rising unemployment. Some local residents quietly voiced frustration online, asking why their sons were being sent to guard empty airfields, while government officials fled to safer cities. Posts on Telegram, quickly deleted by moderators, described villages living in darkness and silence, waiting for the next drone siren. The political dimension of Crimea's unraveling is even more explosive. Military bloggers traditionally supportive of the Kremlin have begun criticizing the command structure, accusing generals of incompetence and the defense ministry of criminal negligence. The once tight propaganda wall is cracking under the pressure of repeated defeats. And while open protests remain dangerous, small symbolic acts of defiance have appeared, graffiti calling for peace, mothers refusing to let their sons enlist, even Orthodox priests praying publicly for an end to fratricide. Each gesture, though small, signals that fear is no longer absolute. For Putin, Crimea is both sacred and strategic. Losing it would mean not only a military failure, but a political humiliation that could fracture his inner circle. Western intelligence suggests the Kremlin has redeployed elite airborne units from other fronts to fortify the peninsula, a move that weakens Russia's positions elsewhere. Meanwhile, NATO reconnaissance assets have detected increased electronic warfare activity, indicating that Russia is desperately trying to blind Ukrainian drones. Yet the results speak for themselves. Explosions continue nightly, often within range of key Russian naval installations. From a demographic perspective, the toll on Crimea's population is severe. Tens of thousands of young men have been conscripted or have fled to mainland Russia to avoid mobilization. Skilled technicians and engineers essential for maintaining energy grids and port facilities are leaving en masse. As one Western demographer put it, Crimea is hollowing out. The peninsula, once touted as a tourist paradise, now risks becoming a ghost zone of soldiers, elderly residents, and abandoned infrastructure. This demographic bleeding compounds Russia's national crisis, draining human capital faster than it can be replaced. Strategically, the success of Ukraine's strikes marks a turning point. By neutralizing high-value defenses and forcing Moscow to divert resources southward, Kyiv has begun reshaping the entire front line. For NATO observers, this demonstrates that air superiority is no longer about having more planes. It's about having smarter weapons. By the week's end, Russian state TV tried to reassure viewers with images of calm beaches and smiling tourists in Crimea. But the reality on the ground was different. Empty streets, shuttered shops, and distant echoes of explosions rolling over the Black Sea. The peninsula that once symbolized triumph now embodied vulnerability. And as Ukrainian commanders vowed that Crimea will be free. One question lingered across both sides of the front. If Putin cannot defend the crown jewel of his empire, can he defend anything at all? Across the Russian Federation, the illusion of control is crumbling. As drone debris fell over refineries, storage depots, and military zones, Moscow unveiled a new and desperate defense doctrine, one that replaced technology with manpower. Soldiers with machine guns now stand guard where sophisticated missile systems once operated. Videos circulating on Telegram show young conscripts firing blindly into the sky, their tracer rounds vanishing against the darkness as drones slip past undetected. It is a startling image, a nuclear superpower reduced to shooting at shadows. The Ministry of Defense insists this low-cost interception model is part of a new efficiency strategy. In truth, it reveals a deeper crisis. Russia is running out of both money and munitions. Western intelligence estimates suggest that by mid-2025, Moscow had expended nearly 70% of its advanced surface-to-air missile inventory. The production lines that could replenish them are constrained by sanctions lacking Western chips and precision components. That shortage has forced the Kremlin to make a grim calculation. It is cheaper to risk losing a refinery than to waste million-dollar missiles on drones worth a fraction of that cost. But this frugality comes at a deadly price. Every failed interception leads to millions in losses, environmental damage, and growing unrest among factory workers, whose livelihoods vanish overnight. Regional governors plead for reinforcements, but Moscow's priority remains securing its own borders and political symbols. The contrast is stark. While soldiers patrol oil fields in Tatarstan, with Kalashnikov's elite units defend the Kremlin with modern radar and counter-drone systems. From a social perspective, this two-tiered defense exposes a widening rift within Russia. In the capital, residents still attend theater performances and shop in luxury malls. In provincial towns, mothers bury sons who died defending pipelines. The burden of war has become class-based. Data compiled by independent demographers show that ethnic minority regions such as Dagestan, Buryatia, and Tuva continue to suffer casualty rates up to 10 times higher than those of Moscow and St. Petersburg. For families in these areas, the Kremlin's defense of the motherland has become a hollow phrase, one paid for with the blood of the poor. The exploitation is palpable. Wealthy elites, shielded by distance and privilege, while impoverished conscripts are thrown into a futile effort to stop the unstoppable. Politically, the imagery of soldiers firing rifles at drones has become a metaphor for Putin's fading power. On state television, commentators praise their bravery. On independent channels and foreign media, it is ridiculed as a sign of decline. Even among Russia's war supporters, frustration grows. Influential military bloggers have called the defense policy a circus act, accusing commanders of sacrificing men to protect the leadership's vanity. Meanwhile, small but persistent voices of dissent are rising among families of the mobilized. The soldiers' mothers' movement, suppressed for years, has quietly resurfaced. Through encrypted chats on Telegram, mothers share casualty lists and organize candlelight vigils under neutral slogans like "Bring them home." Their protests may be small, but they pierce the propaganda bubble in ways overt opposition never could. Authorities hesitate to arrest grieving mothers, knowing the optics would spark outrage. This soft pressure, moral, emotional, and maternal, is becoming a potent force, especially as the war drags into its fourth year. Economically, Russia's improvisational defense tactics signal depletion. Reports from the Russian Audit Chamber confirm that emergency spending on domestic security has doubled since 2024, diverting funds from education, healthcare, and regional development. Inflation continues to erode wages, while the ruble's depreciation has made imported goods unaffordable. The Kremlin's response has been to tighten censorship and flood media channels with patriotic content, framing hardship as sacrifice. Yet behind closed doors, even officials admit that morale is slipping. From a demographic perspective, the longer soldiers are redeployed from factories to defense duty, the more severe Russia's labor shortages become. Skilled technicians once working in energy plants or machine-building sectors are now guarding warehouses. The double loss is devastating. Production slows, and the younger workforce disappears into military service or exile. Analysts call it demographic bleeding, a self-inflicted wound that will haunt Russia for decades. As autumn approaches, Ukraine's drone campaign shows no sign of slowing. Each strike exposes another layer of decay within Russia's command structure. What began as a show of strength is now a portrait of exhaustion. And while Putin publicly insists that Russia stands united, the silence from the countryside, broken only by gunfire and distant explosions, tells another story entirely. How long can a nation built on fear continue when its defenders are armed, not with technology, but with desperation? By late 2025, Russia's economic foundation began to buckle under the twin pressure of war and sanctions. Ukraine's targeted strikes on oil refineries and export terminals had crippled one of the Kremlin's last reliable sources of foreign income. The country's shadow fleet, hundreds of aging tankers used to smuggle oil through the Baltic and Black Seas, faced new Western crackdowns. Insurance bans, tighter maritime tracking, and freezing of assets had stranded several vessels in neutral ports. In a matter of months, Moscow's oil revenue had fallen by nearly 40%, according to independent European financial monitors. The fallout was immediate. Russia's central bank raised interest rates above 20% to stabilize the ruble, but the currency continued to slide. Inflation surged past 17%, wiping out savings and triggering food shortages in smaller cities. State-controlled media insisted the economy was stable, but social media told another story: empty grocery shelves, fuel rationing, and long lines at ATMs. For ordinary citizens, daily life now resembled the 1990s economic chaos many had hoped never to see again. From a social perspective, this economic unraveling intensified inequality across the Federation. The metropolitan centers Moscow and St. Petersburg still received prioritized fuel and electricity, while rural regions faced rolling blackouts. Hospitals in the Far East reported critical shortages of medical supplies, and public transport in Ural towns was paralyzed due to a lack of diesel. Yet luxury stores in the capital continued to thrive, catering to oligarch families insulated from the crisis. The resentment brewing among the working class was evident in online forums and regional news outlets, where users condemned the parasitic elite that lives off our suffering. In Dagestan and Buryatia, anger took a sharper tone. These regions, already ravaged by disproportionate mobilization losses, now faced economic collapse. With their young men either dead or deployed, local economies dependent on remittances from conscripts were falling apart. "We send our sons and get empty shelves in return," one woman told an independent reporter before her post was swiftly deleted. This widening gap between sacrifice and survival is tearing at the social fabric that once kept Russia's vast regions aligned under Moscow's authority. Politically, the Kremlin's control apparatus is fraying. The Ministry of Defense and the FSB are reportedly clashing over funding and accountability, each blaming the other for security failures. Insiders describe growing paranoia inside Putin's inner circle, where loyalty tests and purges have become routine. Several mid-level officials have disappeared from public view after criticizing the allocation of war funds. These fissures are what Western analysts now call cracks in control, subtle yet unmistakable signs that Putin's power, though still formidable, is no longer absolute. Internationally, the perception of Russia as an energy superpower has collapsed. NATO economists and defense experts emphasize that Ukraine's drone strategy is not merely tactical, but systemic. It aims to sever the link between Russia's resource wealth and its ability to sustain war. As retired U.S. General Ben Hodges recently explained, "When you destroy oil exports, you destroy the war chest. Every refinery that burns is another month off Russia's military calendar." From a demographic perspective, the consequences of this economic crisis extend far beyond 2025. Russia is now losing nearly 500,000 people annually, a combination of war casualties, emigration, and declining birth rates. The mass exodus of educated professionals, IT engineers, doctors, and teachers has gutted the middle class and stunted future innovation. Labor shortages are pushing wages up, but productivity down, creating an economy that works harder for less. Even the military-industrial sector, the regime's last industrial stronghold, faces a workforce crisis. Older engineers are retiring faster than they can be replaced, while young graduates flee to Kazakhstan, Armenia, or the EU to avoid conscription. Western intelligence estimates that by mid-2026, Russia's defense budget will consume over 40% of federal spending, an unsustainable level for a nation already in recession. The Kremlin's solution has been to print money, pushing inflation higher still. Meanwhile, the gap between propaganda and reality widens daily. Television hosts continue to boast of inevitable victory, but soldiers' families speak quietly of missing paychecks, hunger, and broken promises. For all its bravado, the Russian war machine is now being suffocated not by enemy fire, but by its own weight, a sprawling empire of inefficiency and fear collapsing under the strain of economic entropy. Ukraine's drones may have sparked the fire, but the rot was already there, spreading from within. And as winter closes, one question dominates both Moscow's corridors and its quiet kitchens: can Putin's government survive a war that is devouring the very economy meant to fund it? As Russia's economy wobbled and its defenses faltered, the conflict entered a new, invisible phase. One fought not just with weapons, but with information. Ukrainian drones continued to strike, but so did its words. Kyiv's digital strategy, powered by an expanding network of intelligence analysts, open-source trackers, and AI-driven reconnaissance, began to dominate the narrative battlefield. For every refinery destroyed, Ukraine released high-resolution footage within hours. The message to the world and to Russia was unmistakable: there is nowhere left to hide. Inside Russia, however, the information war took a darker turn. State censors tightened their grip on social media platforms, banning references to the strikes or labeling them fake news. Journalists were arrested for reporting on power outages, and ordinary citizens were fined for sharing videos of explosions. Yet, as is often the case in authoritarian regimes, repression only fueled curiosity. Telegram became the nation's underground newsroom, hosting millions of users trading footage, rumors, and casualty lists. For the first time, narratives of defeat were being shaped not in the Kremlin studios, but in encrypted group chats. From a political perspective, this decentralization of information has begun to undermine Putin's monopoly on truth. The Kremlin can control state television, but not the fragmented, decentralized world of digital resistance. Among these new voices are mothers, widows, and veterans, individuals with moral authority that propaganda cannot silence. The Soldiers' Mothers movement, now revitalized across multiple regions, has become a symbol of moral resistance. Their online petitions and quiet vigils, often disguised as memorials for peace, spread through Telegram with breathtaking speed. What makes them powerful is precisely what makes them unthreatening on the surface. They are not political actors, but grieving citizens. The state struggles to suppress such voices without appearing cruel and illegitimate. Simultaneously, the war's demographic consequences have grown impossible to ignore. Russia is facing a generational void. Tens of thousands of young men have died, many more are maimed or psychologically broken, and millions of educated youth have fled abroad. In the cities, classrooms and universities are half empty. Labor shortages in agriculture and industry have forced the government to quietly recruit migrants from Central Asia for military and civilian roles, sparking tension among local populations. Economists warn that within 5 years, Russia's workforce could shrink by nearly 10%, a contraction that will cripple any post-war recovery. From a social perspective, the psychological toll is equally severe. Surveys conducted by independent researchers show a dramatic rise in depression, alcoholism, and suicide, particularly among veterans returning from the front. In small towns, the loss of a generation of men has left communities unbalanced: schools without teachers, farms without laborers, homes without fathers. The Kremlin's promises of honor and sacrifice ring hollow when families can barely afford funerals. And as poverty deepens, inequality becomes visible in ways that even censorship cannot hide. Moscow's affluent suburbs glow with new construction and imported cars, while villages across the provinces crumble into silence. The Ukrainian strategy, meanwhile, has evolved beyond military precision. It now targets the architecture of Russian-controlled logistics, communications, and morale. Each successful strike not only cripples fuel supplies, but weakens faith in the regime's competence. Western analysts describe this as cognitive warfare, winning the perception battle before winning the physical one. With each viral video of a refinery engulfed in flames, Putin's narrative of inevitability fades a little more. The political cracks are spreading too. Reports from within the Russian elite suggest quiet divisions among oligarchs and regional leaders, some advocating for a ceasefire, others pushing for escalation. These power struggles, though hidden, are reminiscent of late Soviet decay, the period when officials privately acknowledged the empire was collapsing, but publicly swore loyalty to its myths. For the Kremlin, the worst threat may no longer be external. It is internal fatigue, a slow erosion of belief. Even in loyal circles, whispers circulate: how much longer can this last? When people stop believing, even the most fearsome regimes eventually crumble. As 2026 approaches, Ukraine's campaign has forced Russia into an existential confrontation with itself. Its wealth is burning, its youth are gone, its mothers are rebelling, and its leadership hides behind propaganda. The war that was meant to secure Russia's dominance may instead be scripting its decline. And while Putin retreats deeper into fortified bunkers, one question echoes through both nations, not in whispers, but in headlines, classrooms, and homes. If this war has reached every corner of Russia, will it also reach the limits of Putin's power? The 6 sections trace the unraveling of Russia's military, economic, and moral stability in 2025 as Ukraine expands its drone warfare deep into Russian territory. What began as isolated strikes evolved into a campaign that crippled refineries, power plants, and air defenses, exposing systemic corruption and inequality inside Russia. From Moscow's privileged elites to the impoverished families of Dagestan and Buryatia, the social divide grew into open resentment. Politically, cracks appeared through the soldiers' mothers' movement, social media dissent, and quiet rifts within the Kremlin's hierarchy. Economically, the collapse of oil revenues and sanctions pushed inflation and shortages to crisis levels, while demographically, Russia faced an irreversible drain of its young and skilled population. Ukraine's hybrid strategy, combining precision strikes with psychological and informational warfare, turned Russia's strengths into weaknesses, revealing that the Kremlin's power rested on illusion, not endurance. As the conflict stretches into 2026 under Trump's renewed Western policy pressure, one truth becomes evident: the war no longer defines Ukraine's survival, but Russia's decline.